Hi there IndyCar fans, welcome back to IndyCar's first show of November, and happy Halloween to everybody who was out enjoying themselves last night. There were a lot of you, as far as I could see from West End of Glasgow last night. Now the stories I want to talk about today, as usual, there are three of them, and I think the first one is probably something we've all suspected for quite a long time, and that is that the British government's energy regulator, Ofgem, has been secretly stacking the deck with regards to the energy costs in Scotland. Now we know that energy costs in Scotland have risen dramatically and are likely to rise, in fact, even more dramatically in the next few months, but not many people know just exactly how we compare with, let's say, a Tory voting constituency in the southeast of England when it comes to the rise in their energy charges. Well, you might be surprised to know, or maybe you won't be surprised to know, that energy cost rises in Scotland in the most extreme cases, and those would be the Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland particularly, are 13 times higher than they are in Tory voting constituencies in England. And this is the result of a wide-ranging report made by the Citizens Advice Bureau and another, I think there's another energy watchdog as well involved in publishing this report. Now, you might be thinking, well, why is that? We produce, as the report states, 3 times as much renewable energy as we actually consume. So we export a lot of what we don't use to England. Probably something like 2/3 of our entire renewable energy output is exported to England. And of course, it costs the energy companies in Scotland far more to connect that energy to the English grid system than it does for, let's say, Scottish energy system to have English energy, if you want to call it English energy, energy made in England, if you like, exported into Scotland. So the entire energy network and the entire energy market in the United Kingdom is completely corrupt. And I think it's safe to say that it is being manipulated by Ofgem and possibly at the behest of the Tory government. Now, it appears that what is happening is that, in general terms, energy rises in SNP controlled areas in Scotland are approximately, and this is the average, rising by £54. That's the average, but it's not the extreme. The extreme is £228 in the Western Isles. That's a huge jump. Anyway, I'll come back to the figures in a moment. So SNP areas are seeing on average rises in energy costs this winter of £54 on top of what they're already paying. That's the average. What do you think the average is in the southeast of England? Any guesses? £17. That's all they are being asked to pay more for their energy in England. Now, who makes this decision? Ofgem. Who tells Ofgem how to stack the deck? You have to ask yourself, because obviously this is not fair. Certainly, as Scotland is the biggest producer of renewable energy in the United Kingdom, and it exports it all to England, and it has to pay a huge amount more to do that than England does to import its energy into Scotland. The entire energy system of the United Kingdom, including its so-called national grid, is split into two. The disadvantaged area of Scotland, which is heavily punished for voting SNP. Interestingly, Tory voting areas in Scotland are not seeing the same rises, according to this report. And Tory voting areas in England are not seeing anything like the rises that SNP voting areas in Scotland are seeing. This can only be characterised as corruption. It can't be anything else. It is just simply political manipulation of energy costs to punish people for voting SNP. And frankly, I am appalled by the actual findings in this report. So that is astonishing. The other thing that caught my attention, and you've probably all seen this, is quite a widely reported piece about the Green Party's, or the Scottish Green Party's conference, at which a motion was passed by 88% of whoever was there, presumably, that Shetland, the Shetland Islands I should say, should be made independent of Scotland. That the Shetland Islanders should be granted full autonomy over trade, taxation, health, education, energy, presumably also the environment and a whole lot of other things. And they passed this motion that this should happen. Now, the Greens have said, to be fair to them, this is what they've said. They've said that this is why they support Scottish independence, because Scottish independence should mean more devolution to more areas. But why specifically did they decide on Shetland? I think the answer to that lies in the makeup of the Shetland Islands Council, which I had a look at today just to see how many Tories, how many SNP, how many Greens, how many independent candidates there were. There didn't appear to be any Tories at all. Now that surprised me. And it surprised me because I would have expected to see a lot of Tory councillors or Tory affiliated councillors in an area which has such high value to the British economy as the oil industry does, which of course brings oil ashore to Shetland and Shetland and has all sorts of infrastructure there. I would have expected to see some Tories there. But what I did see was a vast majority of those councillors, 19 of them in all, claimed to be independent. Not independents, but independent. Now, what were they before they were independent, you have to ask? Well, we can't find any information on that. We've no idea what their political affiliations are. Wonder why they're hiding that, particularly. There was one SNP, I think there was one Green, and there were a few others who were non-affiliated or NA. But the vast majority, 19 councillors, claimed to be independents. And the man behind it all, a guy called Duncan Anderson, I believe he is, young man he seems to be, claims that this is what the Shetland Islanders want. That they're sick of, having decisions made for them by the Scottish government, by the Scottish Parliament. So they want full fiscal autonomy. They want to be like the Faroe Islands. Now it's not specified, particularly by the Shetlanders, who they are trying to be independent from or of, but according to the Greens it would be independent of both the British state and the Scottish government. So we're talking about two governments who would have absolutely no control over what the Shetland Islanders got up to. Now the Green Party, has to be said, took a major hit when it comes to their popularity in Shetland when they were involved in the ill-fated Protection of Marine Environments Act, or whatever it was called recently in the Scottish Parliament, a bill which incidentally was, I think, recently withdrawn because it affected so many people who depended for their livelihoods on fishing and lobster fishing and shellfish and so on. So that fell by the wayside and made them deeply unpopular with many islanders. Perhaps this is an attempt by the Scottish Greens to garner some support from the islanders of Shetland. But you have to wonder really what it is that Shetland is actually trying to do here. Because if you imagine for a moment this happened, and it happened while Scotland isn't independent, those Shetland Islanders could basically affiliate to any other government they wish. Like you could even affiliate to the Faroe Islands if they wanted to. They would have more power than the whole of the Scottish Parliament has, because they would have power over trade, industry, energy, which we don't have any control over at all. That's why we are paying such sky-high bills, incidentally. They would have all of the fiscal autonomy which Scotland should have if it had so-called Devo Max, as Gordon Brown promised we would get if we voted no. We all know what happened there. But imagine that Shetland got all of this power. Shetland becomes like a mini-state, right? I don't know how many thousands of people live in Shetland, but it can't be more than, what, maybe 50, 60,000 people? I don't know. Somebody will tell me what the population of the Shetland Islands actually is. Now, it also maybe includes Orkney, but it's not specifically mentioned in this particular plan. The other thing I have to wonder is, how serious are the Greens about Scottish independence if they're prepared to put forward such a bizarre scheme as this? Whose scheme is this? Is it the Greens? Or have the Greens been responding to something which has been fought for by what I would call closet Tories, people who are unwilling or ashamed to tell people that they are actually Tory voters or Tory supporters and are claiming to be independents. I suspect it's a little bit of all of this, but it calls into question, I think, the claim by the Green Party that they're a party of independence. They seem to be a party of independence for Shetland, first and foremost, and a party for independence for Scotland somewhere further down the line. Now, the Greens have a stated policy of increasing devolved power to all sorts of different areas. But you have to question why they picked Shetland here. What's the connection between Duncan Anderson and, I'm trying to remember the name of the Green spokesman, whoever it was, who proposed this particular policy to the Green conference. Now, it passed at 88% of the vote in the hall, which I think shows you that the Greens think that this is a great idea. Maybe they're seeing it as an experiment. Maybe it's to be the pathfinder for other forms of devolved administrations in other islands, in other Highland communities. But as far as I can see, this is a highly risky manoeuvre. Remember that the people who want this to happen, so desperately want to split Scotland and Shetland apart, are the Tories. Shetland has this connection with the oil industry, and of course it was deeply resentful of what the Greens were proposing about protecting the marine environment, because they know that the oil industry does almost nothing to protect the marine environment. I'm sure they will complain that they comply with all regulations. Maybe they do. But on the other hand, the oil industry is very far from being clean. Let's face it, things leak all the time, and the marine environment suffers for it. Okay, lots of jobs depend on the oil industry in Shetland, and I'm pretty sure there is a hefty amount of Tory voting people who have moved to Shetland to follow the bonanza of oil, especially now that, 24 new drilling licenses have been issued by the British government to the north of Shetland. And this, I think, is what it's really about. It's about Britain maintaining access to those oil fields. Even if Scotland became independent, they want to make sure that Shetland is not a part of Scotland, and that Shetland would do a deal with England to protect its oil fields as they see it. So there's a lot going on here beneath the surface, which I'm deeply suspicious of. It could be that the Greens are just naive enough not to see this, but I'm seeing it, and I'm sure many independent supporters are looking at this and thinking, this is a plot. This is not necessarily the Greens coming up with a wonderful idea. This is the Greens being manipulated by concealed Tory councillors who are pretending to be independents, perhaps in Shetland, and trying to get the Greens to come up with this, which they know will divide the Greens and the SNP and divide the Greens from the independence movement by doing so. This would be a win-win for unionism if it ever happened. Luckily, the likelihood of it ever happening is very, very, very small, and thankfully the Greens are very unlikely to get this particular policy anywhere. For one thing, they would need to be in government, and they would need to be in charge of particularly energy, but they'd also need to be some kind of devolution minister in order to make this one stick, so it's probably not going to happen. But the fact that they're considering it worries me greatly. That, I mean, some people have characterised the Scottish Green Party as a bunch of middle-class armchair environmentalists who are so naive that they don't see the political ramifications of some of the things that they propose. Possibly that is unfair, but it's sometimes the way people perceive them. My final piece of information today came to me from another blogger online, and it concerns England's largest ever ferry, the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier. I'm characterising it as a ferry because it's an aeroplane ferry, and it's limped back to port. Not for the first time, incidentally. I think this must be at least the third, possibly even the fourth time that it's had to be escorted back into harbour for what are feared to be major repairs to something or other on board that ship. And yet we never hear the British media going on and on about how bad the Tory government is for creating ships which constantly break down, especially massively expensive £1 billion aircraft carriers, which seem to be constantly breaking down. I think the sister ship, the Queen Elizabeth, has barely made it out of port through its sea trials and is still not being commissioned. Both of these carriers, if I recall correctly, cost about $2 billion each, and of course the man responsible for deciding to build them was none other than Mr. Devomax himself, Gordon Brown. So here we have a big aeroplane ferry, in fact 2 of them, which can't sail, which have cost us billions of pounds of taxpayers' money, as the British state would say, and yet the British media is not lambasting the Tories for creating them, nor the Labour Party for commissioning them at such an enormous cost to you and I, for what is basically a missile magnet, because no matter what way you paint an aircraft carrier or how many missile systems and radars you put on it, it's a gigantic kind of flytrap for every kind of homing missile that you can think of, and the Ukrainians have already demonstrated just how vulnerable any kind of a ship is to any medium range cruise missile. So here we have the usual double standards. So we've got the people of Scotland, who, particularly the SNP voting areas of Scotland, being massively punished for their political decisions by Ofgem. In the meantime, Ofgem is charging Scottish energy producers of green electricity far more than their counterparts in the south of England, who are often actually paid to bring energy into their so-called national grid. And then we have these 2 massive boondoggle ships, which cost all of us probably enough money to completely renovate the entire NHS in Scotland, which of course can't happen because they wanted to build these 2 massive floating white elephants, which don't work. Anyway, that's about it from me today. I hope I've given you some food for thought. Some of what I said today may not be all that accurate, incidentally, because I had a problem with Facebook earlier on. I've had to actually uninstall Facebook completely because somebody, somewhere, had interfered with Facebook settings on my phone. So whoever it was, it didn't work. I reinstalled a new version of it, and here I am. So thank you all for watching to the end of the program. As usual, thank you all to all of my my donors, whoever you are. I've put the donation link up on every program because right at the moment I really need your help to keep going. There may be some good news on the horizon with regards to IndyCar in the next couple of years, I hope, but I'll keep you posted on that. I have to be a bit vague about that just now, but things are moving in the background. There might be something new happening with IndyCar in the next year or so, but we'll see. Please keep the donations coming, and thank you very much, all of you, for being so loyal to the programme for so long. And I know I can't put my programmes out exactly at the same time each day at the moment, but that also might change in the next 12 months or so. So as I always say, keep the faith, but remember, the reason you're being overcharged for your renewable energy, the stuff that your country actually makes and you have to buy back, is because Ofgem is punishing you for voting SNP. And at the same time, the Greens have come up with a baffling idea for trying to make Shetland into a micro-country. Bizarre though it might seem, that's what they want to do. And we have 2 vastly expensive and useless aircraft carriers that nobody wanted in the first place and that the newspapers refused to complain about. Anyway, that's it from me today. As I say, keep the faith. I'll be back again in the next few days. See you soon. Bye for now.